Hell's Angel was meant to die in a crash, but the single mom saved him just in time. The night wrapped around Zane McGrath like a cold embrace as he pushed his motorcycle faster along the empty country road. The powerful engine rumbled beneath him, its familiar vibration doing little to calm the storm in his mind. Tall trees lined both sides of the road, their branches reaching out like dark fingers against the starlit sky. His leather jacket creaked as he leaned into another curve, the wind whipping at his face. The speedometer crept higher, 70, 80, 90. The yellow lines on the road blurred into one continuous streak. "Can't stop now," he muttered through clenched teeth. His hands gripped the handlebars tighter, knuckles white beneath his fingerless gloves. Every mile put more distance between him and the life he was desperate to leave behind, but somehow the memories kept pace. The faces of his former brothers flashed through his mind, men he'd once called family, now turned enemies. The things they'd done together, the lines they'd crossed, the lives they'd ruined, it all weighed on him like chains around his neck. 100 miles per hour now. The engine screamed in protest as Zane twisted the throttle further. The cold air stung his eyes, but he barely noticed. All he could see were the shadows of his past, the drugs, the violence, the betrayal. Each memory pushed him to go faster, as if speed alone could outrun guilt. The road stretched endlessly before him, a black ribbon cutting through the darkness. His heart pounded in his chest, matching the rhythm of the engine. Every thump reminded him he was still alive, still running, still trying to find a way out of the mess he'd made of his life. The tattoos on his arms, marks of loyalty to a brotherhood that had become his prison, seemed to burn beneath his jacket. How many times had he told himself one last job, or, after this, I'm done? But there was always another job, another fight, another reason to sink deeper into the darkness. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. A deer appeared in his headlight, frozen in fear. Zane swerved hard, the bike wobbling dangerously. His stomach lurched as he fought to regain control. The world tilted sideways, then straightened, but something felt wrong. The bike didn't respond like it should. Time seemed to slow down. He saw the guardrail approaching, gleaming dully in his headlight. His muscles tensed as he tried to correct his course, but the bike had other ideas. The front wheel shuddered, then caught on something. A patch of gravel, a pothole, it didn't matter. The impact came with a horrific screech of metal on metal. Zane felt himself flying, weightless for a moment that stretched into eternity. The ground rushed up to meet him, hard and unforgiving. Pain exploded through his body as he hit the asphalt, rolling and sliding until he came to rest beneath his mangled bike. Heat washed over him as flames erupted from the twisted wreckage. Through blurry vision, he watched the orange glow dance against the trees. The fire's warmth felt distant, disconnected, as if it belonged to another world. Blood trickled down his face, its metallic taste on his tongue. As consciousness began to fade, a strange sense of peace settled over him. Maybe this was always how it was meant to end, alone on a dark road, paying the price for a life lived in shadows. His last thought drifted through his mind like smoke. He was meant to die here. Tessa Montgomery's fingers drummed against the steering wheel in rhythm with the old country song playing softly on the radio. The clock on her dashboard read 11:43 p.m., and her whole body ached from 12 hours of carrying heavy plates and refilling endless cups of coffee at Pete's Diner. She rolled her shoulders, trying to work out the knots that had formed there. The headlights of her old Honda Civic cut through the darkness of the country road, illuminating the familiar route home. Trees lined both sides, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze. Just 15 more minutes, she whispered to herself, thinking of Lucas. Her 15-year-old would be waiting up for her, probably pretending to do homework, but really playing video games. The thought brought a tired smile to her face. Her leg twinged, a reminder of the injury that had ended her nursing career 3 years ago. The constant standing during her double shifts always made it worse, but bills didn't pay themselves. The diner job, combined with her part-time bookkeeping work, barely kept them afloat. Tessa adjusted her position in the seat, trying to find relief from the persistent ache. The radio crackled with static for a moment, and she reached over to adjust it. Through the windshield, she caught a strange orange glow in the distance, flickering against the trees. "What in the world?" she muttered, squinting to see better. As she rounded the bend, her headlights illuminated the scene. A motorcycle wreck, flames licking up from its twisted metal frame. The guardrail was bent and mangled where the bike had hit it. Without hesitation, Tessa pulled over to the shoulder, her tires crunching on gravel. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone from her purse, already dialing 911 as she jumped out of the car. The dispatcher's voice came through clearly. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's been a motorcycle accident on Route 27, about 3 miles east of the Palmer Creek Bridge," Tessa reported, her old nursing training kicking in as she jogged toward the wreck. "The bike's on fire, and She stopped short, her breath catching in her throat. There, beneath the burning motorcycle, she saw a man's body. "Ma'am, are you still there?" Yes, there's someone trapped under the bike. Send emergency services now." Tessa dropped her phone into her pocket, her heart pounding against her ribs. The heat from the flames pressed against her face as she got closer, but she couldn't wait for help to arrive. Every second counted. She could see the man wasn't moving. His leather jacket was torn, and blood matted his hair. The flames were spreading, getting dangerously close to him. Tessa's legs screamed in protest as she crouched down beside him, assessing the situation with practiced eyes despite her panic. The bike hadn't completely pinned him. There was a chance she could pull him free. Gritting her teeth against the pain in her leg, Tessa hooked her arms under his shoulders. The man was heavy, solid muscle under his jacket, but adrenaline surged through her body as she pulled. "Come on," she growled through clenched teeth, dragging him inch by inch away from the burning wreck. Her muscles trembled with the effort, and sweat ran down her face despite the cool night air. The old injury in her leg threatened to give out, but she refused to let go. The heat from the flames pushed her on, driving her despite the agony shooting up her leg. She pulled harder, her boots finding purchase on the rough asphalt. The man's body moved slowly but steadily away from the danger, leaving a dark trail on the road surface. The flashing red and blue lights painted the dark country road in harsh bursts of color. Tessa stood back, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched the paramedics work on the unconscious man in the ambulance. Her hands trembled, sticky with his blood, and the smell of gasoline and burnt rubber filled her nostrils. "Ma'am, you did good work here," one of the paramedics called out to her. "The tourniquet you applied probably saved his leg." Tessa nodded weakly, her old nursing instincts having kicked in automatically when she'd found him. The man's leather jacket had been perfect for making the improvised tourniquet, though cutting through the thick material with her small purse scissors had been a challenge. "BP's dropping," another paramedic announced from inside the ambulance. "We need to move." Tessa's knees felt like they might give out at any moment. The adrenaline that had given her the strength to drag his muscular frame away from the burning wreck was fading fast. She watched as they inserted an IV, attached monitors, and worked with the precise urgency she remembered from her own days in trauma care. The man on the stretcher was massive, all muscle and tattoos. Even unconscious, there was something intimidating about him. His face, though battered, had hard lines that spoke of a difficult life. Dark ink crept up his neck from beneath his torn t-shirt, and his knuckles bore the telltale marks of someone who'd been in more than a few fights. A police officer approached her, notepad in hand. "Ms. Montgomery, we'll need your statement." "Yes, of course," she said, her voice hoarse from the smoke she'd inhaled. She couldn't take her eyes off the ambulance. The man had been so still when she'd found him, pinned beneath the burning motorcycle. She'd feared he was already gone, but then she'd felt his pulse, weak but present. "Stats are stabilizing," one of the paramedics announced, and Tessa released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her leg was screaming in protest now, the old injury making itself known after her burst of emergency activity. She shifted her weight, trying to find a comfortable position as she watched them secure the last of the medical equipment. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a heavy finality. The siren wailed to life, and Tessa watched as the vehicle pulled away, carrying its mysterious passenger toward County General. Red taillights disappeared around the bend, leaving her in the relative darkness, broken only by the remaining police cruiser's lights. She looked down at her bloodied hands, still shaking slightly. The reality of what she'd just done began to sink in. She'd run toward danger instead of away from it, just like she'd been trained to do years ago. But this wasn't a hospital with backup and security. This was a dark road in the middle of nowhere, and she'd put herself at risk to save a complete stranger. The man's face flashed in her mind again. Even in his unconscious state, there had been something dangerous about him, something that set off warning bells in the back of her mind. But none of that had mattered when she'd seen him trapped under that burning bike. Her heart was finally starting to slow from its frantic pace, but a strange mixture of emotions churned in her chest. Relief that she'd been able to help, confusion about the whole situation, and an odd feeling she couldn't quite name. The police officer cleared his throat, pen poised above his notepad. "Ready when you are, ma'am." Tessa's old Honda groaned into the driveway just past midnight. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow that made her modest two-bedroom house look welcoming, despite its peeling paint and crooked shutters. Her hands were still shaking as she turned off the engine. Inside, she found Lucas sprawled on the couch, his laptop balanced precariously on his chest. At 15, he was already taller than her, all gangly limbs and messy brown hair. The TV droned softly in the background. "Mom?" Lucas sat up, his eyes widening at her appearance. "What happened to you?" Tessa looked down at her uniform. Dark stains marked the front of her diner apron, and her hands were still crusted with dried blood, despite her best attempts to clean them at the scene. "There was an accident on Route 16, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "A motorcycle crash. I stopped to help." Lucas was instantly alert, his fingers flying across his laptop keyboard. "Was it bad? It's already hitting the local news sites." Tessa sank into her worn armchair, her leg throbbing from the strain of dragging the man to safety. "Pretty bad. The bike caught fire." She could still feel the heat of the flames on her face, smell the acrid smoke. The rider was trapped, underneath. "Wait," Lucas turned his laptop around. "Was this it?" "Mysterious motorcycle crash on Route 16. Rider rushed to County General in critical condition." Tessa nodded, closing her eyes for a moment. The man's face flashed in her memory. Strong features, a thick beard, and tattoos visible even through the blood and dirt. There had been something both dangerous and vulnerable about him. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," Lucas said, his voice tight with worry. "Your leg!" "I couldn't just drive by, honey." Tessa reached for the TV remote, needing a distraction from her son's concerned face. "Sometimes you have to help, even if it's hard." The local news was already covering the story. A reporter stood at the crash site, the wreckage of the motorcycle visible in the background. Yellow police tape fluttered in the night breeze. "Initial reports suggest the rider may have connections to the notorious hellsangels motorcycle gang," the reporter was saying. "Sources close to the investigation have identified distinctive tattoos and patches on the rider's clothing." Tessa felt her stomach drop. The leather jacket she'd used for the tourniquet, she remembered now seeing patches, symbols she hadn't paid attention to in the rush to save his life. "Mom?" Lucas's voice was sharp with concern. "You helped a gang member?" On the screen, the reporter continued. "While the rider's identity has not been officially released, police confirm he is a known member of one of the most dangerous motorcycle gangs in the state. The investigation is ongoing." Tessa's hands clutched the armrests of her chair. The man she'd pulled from the wreckage, whose blood was still on her clothes. He wasn't just some unfortunate motorcyclist. He was someone dangerous. Someone the news was calling a criminal. She watched as they showed footage of police officers combing the crash site, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The reality of what she'd done began to sink in, heavy and uncomfortable in her chest. Lucas reached over and squeezed her hand. "Maybe you should have left this one to the professionals, Mom." But Tessa couldn't bring herself to agree. Professional or not, she'd sworn an oath once, to help those in need. Even if that oath no longer bound her officially, it was still part of who she was. The news anchor's voice droned on, but Tessa barely heard it. A deep sense of unease settled over her as she stared at the footage of the mangled motorcycle, wondering what consequences her act of kindness might bring. The hospital corridors buzzed with morning activity as Tessa made her way through the maze of white halls. She'd changed out of her diner uniform into a simple blue sweater and jeans, but she still felt out of place among the bustling medical staff. Her cane clicked softly against the linoleum floor, marking each careful step. "I must be crazy," she muttered to herself, adjusting her purse strap. The morning news had confirmed what she'd feared. The man she'd pulled from the wreckage was Zane McGrath, a known member of one of the most dangerous motorcycle gangs in the state. At the nurse's station, a young woman with kind eyes looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to check on Zane McGrath," Tessa said, her voice quieter than she intended. "I'm the one who helped him last night." Recognition flickered across the nurse's face. "Oh, you're her. The one who pulled him from the fire." She glanced around before leaning forward. "Room 412. But be careful. There's a police officer stationed outside." Tessa's heart skipped a beat. Of course there would be. Still, she thanked the nurse and made her way to the elevator, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed the button for the 4th floor. The officer outside room 412 looked bored, but straightened when he saw her approach. After checking her ID and confirming her story with the nurse's station, he let her pass with a warning look. The steady beeping of monitors filled the sterile room. Sunlight streamed through half-drawn blinds, casting strange shadows across the bed where Zane lay. He looked different in the daylight, less threatening, more human. Bandages covered much of his face and arms, and an IV dripped steadily into his arm. Tessa moved closer, her nurse's training taking over as she scanned the monitors. His vitals were stable, but he'd clearly been through major trauma. Burns marked his right side, and his chest rose and fell with the shallow breathing of someone in considerable pain. Taking a seat in the chair beside his bed, Tessa studied his face. Beneath the cuts and bruises, she could see tattoos peeking out from under his hospital gown. Dark ink that told stories she wasn't sure she wanted to know. His hands, resting on top of the thin blanket, were large and scarred, with knuckles that had clearly seen too many fights. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to herself, suddenly uncertain. This man was dangerous. Everyone said so. The news, the police, even the worried looks from the hospital staff confirmed it. But then she remembered his eyes when she'd found him trapped under that burning motorcycle. They weren't the eyes of a hardened criminal. They were the eyes of someone terrified and alone. A slight movement caught her attention. Zane's fingers twitched, and his head turned slightly on the pillow. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and clouded with pain medication. They found her face, and for a moment confusion crossed his features. His lips moved, dry and cracked. "Thank you," he managed to whisper, the words rough and barely audible. Before Tessa could respond, his eyes closed again, and his breathing evened out as he slipped back into unconsciousness. The morning sun filtered through the hospital room's thin curtains, casting soft shadows across Zane's sleeping form. Tessa sat in one of the stiff plastic chairs, her cane propped against the wall beside her. Lucas slouched in the chair next to her, his face buried in his phone, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Mom, why are we even here?" Lucas whispered, glancing nervously at Zane's tattooed arms resting on top of the white hospital sheets. "The news said he's dangerous." Tessa placed a gentle hand on her son's knee. Because everyone deserves kindness, Lucas. Even people who've made mistakes. The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence between them. Tessa studied Zane's face, noticing how different he looked in sleep. Less intimidating, more human. The cuts and bruises from the accident were stark against his pale skin. Lucas shifted in his chair, the plastic squeaking. But what if he... A low groan from the bed cut him off. Zane's eyes fluttered open, focusing first on the ceiling, then slowly turning to take in his visitors. Recognition flickered across his face when he saw Tessa. "You came back," he said, his voice rough from disuse. His gaze drifted to Lucas, who stiffened under the scrutiny. "I did," Tessa replied softly. "This is my son, Lucas." Lucas managed a small nod but said nothing. Zane's eyes lingered on the teenager for a moment before returning to Tessa. "Why?" The question was simple, but loaded with meaning. Tessa adjusted herself in her chair, wincing slightly as she moved her bad leg. The motion didn't escape Zane's notice. "Did that happen when you helped me?" he asked, nodding toward her leg. "No," Tessa shook her head. "This is from before. It's why I'm not a nurse anymore." Zane's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You were a nurse?" "Trauma unit," she said, a hint of pride mixing with something sadder in her voice. "For 12 years. Now I wait tables at May's Diner and help with bookkeeping at the local garage." Lucas looked up from his phone, watching his mother carefully. She rarely talked about her nursing days. "Must be hard," Zane said quietly, "doing it all alone." Tessa's hands twisted in her lap. "We manage. Lucas helps a lot. He's good with computers, fixes things around the house." She smiled at her son, who ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. "Kid's lucky to have you," Zane said, his voice softer than before. He shifted in the bed, grimacing at the movement. "I'm the lucky one," Tessa replied, reaching over to squeeze Lucas's hand. "He's what keeps me going, even on the tough days." She paused, then added, "And there have been plenty of those." Zane's face changed subtly, the hard lines around his mouth softening. He looked at mother and son, really looked at them, as if seeing past their surface for the first time. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable anymore, but filled with something like understanding. "Tell me more," he said finally, his usual gruffness giving way to genuine interest. "About your nursing days. What made you choose that?" Nurse Maria entered the room, her experienced eyes taking in the scene. She gestured for Tessa to join her in the hallway, her face tight with concern. Lucas remained absorbed in his phone, barely noticing as his mother stepped out. "I need to tell you something about your patient," Maria said in hushed tones, glancing through the window at Zane's sleeping form. "I recognized him from the news years ago. He wasn't just any gang member, he was high up in their ranks. They called him the Enforcer." Tessa's fingers tightened around her cane, but her voice remained steady. "That was his past, Maria. I see how gentle he is now, especially when he talks to Lucas." "Gentle?" Maria's eyebrows rose. "Tessa, people like him don't change easily. I've seen too many come through these doors making promises they can't keep." "Maybe they couldn't keep those promises because nobody believed they could," Tessa replied, her voice soft but firm. She looked back through the window, watching Zane's chest rise and fall with each breath. When they returned to the room, Zane was awake, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. Lucas had dozed off, his phone forgotten in his lap. "Your boy's a good kid," Zane said, his voice rough from disuse. "Reminds me of someone I used to know." Tessa settled back into her chair, noting how Zane's expression had softened while watching Lucas sleep. "You seem better today," she observed. "Yeah." He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "Listen, I need to tell you something." His fingers played with the edge of his blanket, a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with his intimidating appearance. "That night on the road, I wasn't trying to survive." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Tessa's heart clenched, but she remained silent, giving him space to continue. Been running for 3 years now, he admitted. From the life I built, from the things I've done. Thought death would be easier than facing it all. His eyes met hers, and she saw raw pain there. Didn't expect anyone to stop. Definitely didn't expect anyone to risk their life pulling me from that wreck. Tessa leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Everyone deserves a second chance, Zane. He let out a bitter laugh. You don't know the things I've done, the people I've hurt. His hand unconsciously traced one of the faded tattoos on his arm, a skull with flames emerging from its eyes. Sometimes I wake up and for a moment I forget who I am. Those are the best moments. Tessa felt her throat tighten. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but something held her back. The conviction in his voice when he spoke about his past sent a chill through her. She'd seen glimpses of goodness in him, especially in quiet moments like these, but doubt crept in like a shadow. Looking at him now, vulnerable, honest, hurting, she saw both the man he was and the man he could be. But the path between those 2 points seemed impossibly long and treacherous. Could someone really leave behind a life of violence and crime? Could the enforcer truly become something else? These questions swirled in her mind as she watched him close his eyes, exhausted by his confession. Even as her heart ached with compassion, a seed of uncertainty took root. She wanted to believe in second chances, but the stakes felt impossibly high. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot as Tessa helped Zane into her old station wagon. His movements were stiff, and pain flickered across his face with each careful step. The discharge papers crinkled in her purse, along with a stack of prescriptions and care instructions. You really don't have to do this, Zane mumbled, his large frame awkwardly fitting into the passenger seat. His few belongings, mostly items the hospital had given him, sat in a small plastic bag between his feet. Doctor's orders were clear. You need supervision for at least another week. Tessa started the car, the engine humming to life. And since you mentioned you don't have anywhere else to go. I could find a motel, he protested weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. On what money? Tessa glanced at him sideways. Besides, I used to be a nurse. I know what I'm doing. The drive to her modest 2-story house was quiet. Lucas was waiting on the porch, homework spread across his lap. He looked up and waved as they pulled into the driveway. I cleared out the guest room, Mom, Lucas called out, gathering his books. And I put fresh sheets on the bed like you asked. Tessa smiled at her son's thoughtfulness. Thank you, sweetheart. She helped Zane out of the car, noting how he tried to hide his grimace of pain. The guest room was small but clean, with soft blue walls and a window overlooking the backyard. A twin bed occupied one corner, and a simple wooden dresser stood against the opposite wall. Zane looked around, his expression unreadable. It's not much, Tessa said, but it's quiet and comfortable. It's more than I deserve, Zane replied softly, lowering himself onto the bed. Lucas appeared in the doorway with a glass of water and Zane's medication. Mom says you need to take these now. Zane accepted the pills with a nod of thanks, his tattooed hands dwarfing the small glass. Tessa noticed how gentle his movements were around Lucas, as if he was consciously trying to appear less intimidating. Dinner's in an hour, Tessa announced. Try to rest until then. As she headed to the kitchen, movement caught her eye through the front window. Mrs. Peterson, her next-door neighbor of 15 years, was standing on her porch, phone in hand, clearly taking pictures of Zane's arrival. Tessa stepped outside, forcing a pleasant smile. Everything okay, Helen? Mrs. Peterson's thin lips pressed together. Tessa, dear, have you lost your mind? Taking in that criminal? He's a patient who needs help recovering, Tessa replied firmly. He's dangerous, Mrs. Peterson hissed. I saw his picture in the paper. He's one of those awful bikers. What about Lucas? Have you even thought about your son's safety? Tessa's grip tightened on her cane. I appreciate your concern, Helen, but, well, don't come crying to me when things go wrong. Mrs. Peterson cut her off. Everyone knows what his kind is capable of. Those tattoos, that reputation, people like that don't change, Tessa. As Tessa watched her neighbor storm back into her house, she felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She looked back at her own home, where through the window she could see Lucas showing Zane something on his phone, both of them smiling. Yet, Mrs. Peterson's words echoed in her mind, planting seeds of doubt she couldn't entirely shake. The doorbell rang just as Tessa was heading out for her afternoon shift at the diner. She opened the front door to find a tall, intimidating man with a clean-shaven head and dark sunglasses. His leather vest displayed patches that made her stomach twist with unease. "Is Zane here?" His voice was cold, emotionless. Before Tessa could respond, Zane appeared behind her. His body tensed, and his face hardened into a mask she hadn't seen before. "Brick," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Brick said, pushing past Tessa into the house. His heavy boots thudded against the wooden floor. Zane placed himself between Brick and Tessa. "You should go to work," he told her quietly. "I'll handle this." Tessa hesitated, her hand clutching her car keys. "Are you sure?" "Yeah." Zane's eyes never left Brick. "Go on." Once Tessa had left, Brick's fake smile disappeared. He walked around the living room, running his fingers along the family photos on the walls. "Playing house with the nurse and her kid? This isn't you, Zane." "What do you want?" Zane's jaw clenched. "The boss wants you back." Brick turned, his eyes cold. "We've got business that needs handling, and you're the best at what you do. I'm done with that life." Zane crossed his arms, his stance firm despite the lingering pain from his injuries. Brick laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Nobody's ever done with us. You know that." He picked up a photo of Lucas and Tessa, studying it. "Nice little family you found here. Be a shame if something happened to them." Zane moved faster than his injuries should have allowed, snatching the photo from Brick's hands. "Leave them out of this." "That's up to you." Brick headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "You've got till the end of the week to come to your senses. After that," he shrugged. "Well, accidents happen all the time, don't they?" After Brick left, Zane sank into the couch, his head in his hands. The weight of his past felt heavier than ever, crushing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. When Tessa returned that evening, she found Zane sitting in the dark living room, staring at nothing. She flipped on the light, making him blink. "Are you okay?" she asked, setting down her purse. "You didn't eat the lunch I left for you." "I'm fine," he mumbled, but his voice was hollow. Throughout dinner, Zane barely spoke. He pushed his food around his plate, lost in thought. Tessa watched him with growing concern, noticing how his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. The easy conversation they'd developed over the past few days had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. Later, as Tessa washed the dishes, she glanced through the window to see Zane sitting on the back porch steps, his head bowed. The man who had slowly been opening up to her, showing glimpses of warmth and humor, had disappeared behind walls she couldn't see through. She dried her hands on a dish towel, wanting to go out there, to ask what was wrong, to help somehow. But something stopped her. The distance he'd put between them felt vast, and she didn't know how to bridge it. The kitchen was quiet, except for the steady drip of the coffee maker. Tessa sat across from Zane at her worn oak table, watching him stare into his untouched mug. The morning sun cast long shadows through the window, highlighting the worry lines etched deep in his face. "They want me back," Zane finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. His fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup, unable to meet Tessa's concerned gaze. Brick wasn't just dropping by for a friendly visit. Tessa's hands tightened around her own mug. "What exactly do they want from you?" "There's a job they need done. Something big." He pushed the coffee away, running his hands through his hair. "I know too much about their operations. They don't trust me being out here, living a regular life." "But you're done with that life," Tessa said firmly. The certainty in her voice made Zane look up. You told me yourself you wanted to change. It's not that simple. Zane's jaw clenched. These people, they don't just let you walk away. They're family, or at least that's what they call themselves. Been that way since I was 18 and stupid enough to think they actually cared about me. Tessa leaned forward, her eyes soft but determined. Real family doesn't threaten you, Zane. Real family doesn't force you to do things that could destroy your life. You don't understand what they're capable of. His voice cracked slightly. Brick, he's not the worst of them. The others... He trailed off, shaking his head. The morning light caught the silver in Tessa's hair as she stood up, moving to sit closer to him. Then help me understand. Tell me what we're dealing with here. We? Zane's head snapped up. There is no we in this, Tessa. I can't drag you into my mess. You and Lucas. You need to stay far away from all of this. I'm already involved, she said quietly. The moment I pulled you from that wreck, I became involved. You can't push me away now. Zane stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. You should have left me there. Should have let me burn. His words were harsh, but his voice trembled. At least then you'd be safe. That's not who I am, Tessa replied. And I don't believe that's who you are, anymore either. Cut ties with them, Zane. Make a clean break. He stopped pacing, bracing himself against the counter. They know where you live now. They've seen Lucas. His knuckles went white against the countertop. I promise I won't let them hurt you. Either of you. But I need to figure this out. Tessa watched him, her heart heavy. The man before her seemed torn between two worlds, the darkness of his past and the possibility of a better future. She wanted to believe his promise of protection, but the tremor in his voice and the fear in his eyes told a different story. I trust you, she said softly, though uncertainty crept into her chest. But I need to know, are you still holding on to something from that life? Something that gives them power over you? Zane's silence was answer enough. He moved toward the window, his broad shoulders tense. I'll protect you both, he repeated, but his words seemed to hang in the air like smoke, insubstantial and fading. Tessa felt a chill run through her despite the warm morning sun. She looked at this man she'd saved, wondering if in doing so, she'd invited danger into her home, into her son's life. The thought made her stomach twist, but she couldn't bring herself to regret helping him, even now. The rumble of motorcycles shattered the peaceful afternoon. Tessa's heart skipped a beat as she peered through the living room curtains. 3 bikes pulled up to her driveway, their riders dressed in leather and covered in tattoos. Lucas came rushing down the stairs. Mom, what's going on? Go to your room, she said firmly, her voice trembling slightly. Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you to. Zane appeared beside her, his face hard as stone. Tessa, take Lucas and go upstairs. Now. But before anyone could move, heavy boots thundered up the porch steps. The front door burst open with a crash that made Tessa jump. Brick, the man who had visited earlier that week, filled the doorway. 2 other bikers flanked him, their expressions cold and menacing. Well, well, Brick drawled, his eyes scanning the room. Quite the cozy setup you've got here, Zane. Playing house with your little rescue family? Zane stepped forward, positioning himself between the intruders and Tessa and Lucas. This isn't the place, Brick. Take it outside. Oh, but this is exactly the place. Brick's smile didn't reach his eyes. See, we've been patient, giving you time to heal up and all. But now it's time to pay your dues. Lucas tried to step forward, but Tessa grabbed his arm, pulling him close. Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched the scene unfold. I told you I'm done, Zane said, his voice low and dangerous. Find someone else for your job. One of the other bikers moved suddenly, pulling out a phone. He held it up, showing security camera footage of Lucas walking to school. Nice kid. Be a shame if something happened to him on his way to class. Tessa's grip on Lucas tightened. Don't you dare threaten my son, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Brick's attention shifted to her. Lady, you don't know what kind of man you've been harboring. Zane here? He's got blood on his hands, lots of it, and he owes us. I don't owe you anything, Zane growled. No? Brick pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. Remember Carson City? That job gone wrong? We've been keeping that evidence safe for you. One phone call to the cops, and you'll be looking at 20 years minimum. The color drained from Zane's face. Tessa watched as his shoulders slumped, the fight seeming to leave him. You do this one job, Brick continued, and we'll call it even. The evidence disappears, and your new family stays safe and sound. The silence that followed was deafening. Tessa could see the internal struggle playing out on Zane's face. Everything they'd built over the past weeks, the trust, the understanding, the possibility of redemption, hung in the balance. Finally, Zane spoke, his voice hollow. When? Tomorrow night. We'll pick you up at 8. Brick's smile widened. Smart choice, brother. The bikers left as suddenly as they had arrived, the sound of their motorcycles fading into the distance. The house felt colder somehow, emptier. Zane, Tessa whispered, you can't go back to them. He wouldn't look at her. I don't have a choice. There's always a choice, she insisted, stepping toward him. We can go to the police, find protection. No, he cut her off sharply. This is the only way to keep you both safe. He finally turned to face her, his eyes filled with pain and determination. I'll do their job, and then it's over. For good. But Tessa saw something in his expression that made her blood run cold. The man she'd come to know over the past weeks, the one who'd shown glimpses of warmth and hope, was disappearing behind the mask of his old life. She wanted to believe him, but doubt crept in like a shadow. How can I trust that you'll come back? She asked quietly. Zane didn't answer. He couldn't. Tessa stood at her kitchen window, watching Zane's figure disappear into the darkness. Her hands gripped the windowsill so hard her knuckles turned white. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the empty kitchen, each second feeling like an eternity. He shouldn't have gone, Lucas said from behind her. His voice was tight with anger and worry. I know. Tessa turned to face her son, trying to hide the fear in her eyes. The house felt colder somehow, emptier without Zane's presence. She hadn't realized how much she'd gotten used to having him around until now. Hours passed like molasses. Tessa paced the living room, unable to sit still. She'd tried to clean, to cook, to do anything to keep her mind off what might be happening, but nothing worked. The dishes sat half-washed in the sink, and dinner remained untouched on the table. Lucas sat on the couch, pretending to do his homework, but really just staring at the same page. Mom, maybe we should call the police. And tell them what? Tessa's voice cracked. We don't even know where he went. The phone rang, making them both jump. Tessa's hands shook as she answered it. A gruff voice she didn't recognize spoke quickly, giving her an address and hanging up before she could respond. Lucas, stay here, she ordered, grabbing her car keys. Mom, no way, I'm coming with you. The drive to the abandoned warehouse district felt endless. Tessa's old Honda groaned as she pushed it faster than she should. When they arrived, the scene made her blood run cold. Police cars surrounded the area, their lights painting everything in harsh red and blue. An ambulance sat with its back doors open. Through the chaos, Tessa spotted Zane being loaded onto a stretcher. His face was bloody, his leather jacket torn. She ran toward him, her bad leg protesting with each step. But she didn't care. Ma'am, you can't, an officer started to say. I'm the one who called him in, a rough voice interrupted. Tessa turned to see a man with a detective's badge. Let her through. Tessa reached Zane just as the paramedics were securing him. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. The paramedic rattled off his injuries. Multiple contusions, possible internal bleeding, broken ribs. What happened? Tessa asked the detective, her voice barely a whisper. "Your friend here tried to play hero," the detective said, shaking his head. "Set up a sting operation to catch his old gang. But something went wrong. They made him before he could get the evidence we needed. It got ugly fast." Lucas appeared at her side, his face pale. "Is he going to be okay?" The paramedic nodded. "He's stable, but he needs surgery. Are you family?" "Yes," Tessa said without hesitation. "We're his family." They followed the ambulance to the hospital, the same one where Tessa had first visited Zane after the crash. Everything felt like it was coming full circle, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't just a stranger helping someone in need. This time, her heart was breaking for a man who'd tried to do the right thing and paid a terrible price. As they wheeled Zane into surgery, Tessa collapsed into a waiting room chair, her legs finally giving out. Lucas sat beside her, taking her hand in his. They settled in for another long wait, both knowing that nothing would be the same after tonight. The ambulance's wailing sirens pierced the quiet night as it raced toward County General Hospital. Inside, Tessa watched helplessly as paramedics worked on Zane's battered body. Blood seeped through his leather jacket, and his face was a map of fresh cuts and bruises. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only reassurance that he was still alive. "Multiple contusions, possible internal bleeding," one paramedic called out. "BP dropping." Tessa's nursing instincts kicked in despite herself. She found her hands moving automatically to help, pressing gauze against wounds, checking vital signs. But this wasn't just another patient. This was Zane, the man she'd trusted, who'd walked straight back into danger despite everything. The emergency room burst into controlled chaos as doctors and nurses swarmed around Zane. Tessa stood back, her scrubs stained with his blood, feeling both angry and worried. She watched as they cut away his jacket, revealing more tattoos, and now fresh wounds that told the story of what had happened. "Multiple broken ribs," the doctor announced. "Get him into X-ray stat." Hours crawled by in the waiting room. Tessa sat with her head in her hands, replaying everything in her mind. The threats from his old gang, the way he'd promised to protect her and Lucas, the moment he'd walked away anyway. When they finally let her see him, Zane lay still in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. His usual imposing presence was diminished by the stark white sheets and the steady drip of morphine keeping him under. Tessa pulled up a chair and sat beside him. Her fingers itched to check his bandages, to make sure everything was done right. Old habits died hard, but she kept her hands in her lap, twisted together. "Why did you do it?" she whispered to his unconscious form. "Why did you go back to them?" The monitors beeped steadily in response. Outside the window, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tessa had called Lucas earlier to let him know she was okay, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Despite everything, despite the betrayal of trust, she couldn't walk away. A nurse came in to check his vitals, giving Tessa a sympathetic look. "The doctor says he'll pull through," she said softly. "He's lucky." Lucky. Tessa almost laughed at that. Lucky was what people said when they didn't know the whole story. Lucky was for people who didn't choose to walk into danger. Lucky was for accidents, not choices. Yet here she sat, watching over him just as she had after the motorcycle crash. Only this time, the trust they'd built lay in pieces around them. The gentle rise and fall of his chest reminded her of all the quiet conversations they'd shared, all the moments when she'd thought she'd seen the real man beneath the tough exterior. Zane stirred slightly, his face contorting in pain even through the medication. Without thinking, Tessa reached for his hand, then stopped herself halfway. Her hand hovered there, caught between the instinct to comfort and the need to protect herself from more hurt. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the hospital room. Tessa remained in her chair, watching Zane's battered face, torn between her shattered trust and the compassion that seemed woven into her very being. She didn't know what would happen when he woke up, didn't know if she could forgive him, but for now, she stayed. Sometimes that was all you could do. Zane woke in pieces. First came the pain, sharp and insistent in his ribs, dull and throbbing, everywhere else. Then came awareness of the hospital room, the familiar beeps and antiseptic smell. Finally, memory crashed over him like cold water. He'd failed. Again. His eyes found Tessa slumped in the chair beside his bed, her head resting against the wall at an awkward angle. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and dried blood, his blood, stained her shirt. She'd stayed all night. The weight of that simple fact pressed down on his chest worse than any broken rib. "You're awake." Tessa's voice was flat, devoid of the warmth he'd grown accustomed to. She straightened in her chair, putting distance between them even though she hadn't moved. "Tessa, Don't." She held up her hand. "The doctors say you'll recover. That's all that matters right now." But it wasn't. They both knew it. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. The betrayal, the broken promises, the danger he'd brought to her doorstep. Zane tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His vision swam, and he gasped against the pain. "Stop moving!" Tessa stood, her nurse's instinct overriding her hurt. She adjusted his pillow, checked his IV. Her hands were gentle, but her face remained closed off. "You have 3 broken ribs and internal bruising. You need to rest." "I thought I could handle it," Zane managed. "Thought I could control the situation, keep you and Lucas safe while what? While you went back to that life?" Tessa's voice cracked. "You don't get it, Zane. We didn't need you to be some tough guy who could handle everything alone. We needed you to trust us enough to stay." The words hit harder than any fist Brick's crew had thrown. Zane stared at the ceiling, blinking back the sting in his eyes. How many times had he screwed up? How many people had he hurt trying to fix things his way? "I've made so many mistakes." The admission felt like pulling glass from a wound. "Everything I touch turns to, I don't know how to be anything other than what I was." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" He finally looked at her. "I'm a criminal, Tessa. I've done things that would make you sick. And now I've put you in danger because I can't let go of..." "Then learn." Tessa's voice softened just slightly. "You saved yourself from that fire once. Maybe it's time to figure out who you want to be instead of who you've been." Zane closed his eyes. Change. The word felt foreign. Impossible. But somewhere in the darkness behind his eyelids, a small spark flickered. Hope, maybe, or just the stubborn refusal to give up that had kept him alive this long. He didn't know where to start. But for the first time, he thought maybe he could try. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors. Tessa sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside Zane's bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window, highlighting the worry lines on her face. "Why are you still here?" Zane's voice was rough with emotion. "After everything I've done, you should hate me." Tessa shifted in her chair, her leg aching from sitting too long. "I don't hate you, Zane. I'm just tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of wondering if I made the right choice. You didn't. Saving me was a mistake." He turned his face away, the tattoos on his neck stark against the white hospital sheets. "Look at me," Tessa said firmly. When he didn't move, she reached out and touched his arm. "Look at me, Zane McGrath." He slowly turned back, his eyes meeting hers. The hardness she'd first seen there months ago had cracked, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said softly. "Even you. Especially you." "You don't know what I've done." His voice cracked. "The people I've hurt." "You're right. I don't know everything about your past." Tessa leaned forward, wincing slightly as her old injury protested. "But I know the man who's been living in my house. The one who helps Lucas with his math homework. The one who fixed my car without being asked. That's the real you, Zane. Tears welled in his eyes. I want to be that person. I do. But my past, it won't let go. Then maybe it's time you faced it head on. Tessa's voice was gentle, but firm. Stop running. Stop letting them control you with threats and fear. They'll hurt you. You and Lucas. His hands clenched into fists. I can't let that happen. We're already hurt, Zane. Living in fear is its own kind of pain. She reached for his hand, uncurling his fingers from their tight fist. I want to believe in you. I do believe in you. Silence filled the room as Zane processed her words. The steady beeping of the heart monitor marked the passing seconds. Finally, he spoke, his voice stronger than before. I need to end this, he said. No more running. No more letting them threaten the people I care about. What are you thinking? Tessa asked, though she already knew the answer. I have evidence. Things I've kept hidden for years. Names, dates, proof of everything they've done. He met her eyes. If I turn it over to the police... You could go to jail too, Tessa finished quietly. Yeah. He swallowed hard. But maybe that's part of earning that second chance you talked about. Tessa squeezed his hand. Whatever you decide to do, I'll help you. No, he said sharply. It's too dangerous. I'm already involved, Zane. She straightened in her chair, showing the same determination that had driven her to pull him from the burning wreckage months ago. We do this together, or not at all. The tension in Zane's shoulders slowly released. He looked at their joined hands, then back at her face. You really mean that, don't you? Every word. She managed a small smile. So, what's it going to be? Zane took a deep breath. I'm done running. It's time to face my past, whatever it costs. Then we'll face it together, Tessa said firmly, sealing their pact with another squeeze of his hand. The police station loomed before them, its brick facade cold and imposing in the early morning light. Zane stood on the sidewalk, his leather jacket hanging loose on his frame after weeks in the hospital. His hands trembled slightly, but his jaw was set with determination. Tessa parked her old sedan across the street, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She watched as Zane took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders like a man walking to his own execution. Are you absolutely sure about this? She asked through the open window, her voice barely above a whisper. I have to do this, Zane replied, not turning to look at her. It's the only way to make things right. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Zane approached the front desk. The officer on duty looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to recognition in an instant. His hand instinctively moved toward his weapon. I'm here to turn myself in, Zane said clearly, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. And I have information about the Hell's Knights gang. The desk sergeant's eyes narrowed. McGrath, right? The one who escaped the crash. That's right. Zane's voice was steady, though his heart hammered in his chest. I want to speak to whoever's in charge of gang investigations. Two officers appeared at his sides, their faces hard with distrust. They patted him down roughly, though he offered no resistance. Through the glass doors, he could see Tessa watching from her car, her face a mixture of pride and fear. Detective Marshall arrived 15 minutes later, his suit wrinkled and his expression skeptical. He led Zane to an interrogation room, the metal chair cold and uncomfortable against his still healing injuries. So, Marshall said, dropping a thick file on the table between them, the infamous Zane McGrath wants to turn state's evidence. Why should we believe anything you have to say? Zane leaned forward, his eyes intense. Because I can give you brick. I can give you the whole operation, the drug routes, the weapons caches, everything. And why now? Marshall's voice dripped with suspicion. What's your angle? Someone showed me there's still good in the world, Zane replied, thinking of Tessa's unwavering faith in him. I'm done running. I'm done being the person I was. Marshall laughed harshly. You expect us to believe you've had some kind of revelation? That you've changed? No, Zane said quietly. I expect you to do your job. Take my statement, check my information, lock me up if you have to. But don't let Brick and his crew keep hurting people because you're too stubborn to listen to someone like me." From across the street, Tessa watched the station entrance, her heart in her throat. Hours had passed and there was no sign of movement. She knew what Zane was risking. Not just his freedom, but his life. The gang would never forgive this betrayal. She saw more police cars arrive, their lights flashing but sirens silent. Detectives rushed, in and out of the building, their movements urgent and purposeful. Something was happening, but she couldn't tell if it was good or bad. Tessa's hands gripped her steering wheel tighter, her prayer a whisper in the quiet car. Everything Zane had worked for, his recovery, his chance at a new life, hung in the balance of what happened inside that building. All she could do was wait and hope that his courage to face his past wouldn't cost him his future. The holding cell was cold and stark, but Zane felt lighter than he had in years. Through the barred window, he could see police cars pulling up to the station, their lights flashing as more gang members were brought in. His testimony had opened the floodgates, and the Hell's Knights were falling one by one. Detective Morris walked past his cell, nodding with grudging respect. 6 arrests so far, he said, pausing at the bars, including Brick and 2 of his lieutenants. Your intel was solid, McGrath. Zane sat on the metal bench, his hands clasped between his knees. There'll be more, he said quietly. They've got operations in 3 counties. The names and locations I gave you should help shut them all down. The detective made some notes in his pocket notebook. You know this doesn't change things for you, right? You're still looking at time. I know. Zane's voice was steady. I'm done running from what I did. Hours passed like molasses. Zane dozed fitfully on the hard bench, his dreams filled with faces from his past, men he'd fought with, betrayed, and now helped bring to justice. The sound of footsteps woke him, and he opened his eyes to see Tessa standing outside his cell, her face drawn with concern. Hey, she said softly, her hands gripping the cold metal bars. Zane stood slowly, his ribs still sore from his recent injuries. You shouldn't be here, Tessa. Don't tell me where I should or shouldn't be. Her voice was gentle but firm. I needed to see you. The guard brought a plastic chair for Tessa, positioning it a few feet from the bars. She sat down, smoothing her worn jeans with trembling hands. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. Lucas asked about you, she said. He's worried. Zane's throat tightened. Tell him I'm okay. Tell him. He paused, struggling to find the right words. Tell him I'm finally doing the right thing. Tessa's eyes welled with tears. I'm proud of you, Zane. What you did today, turning yourself in, helping the police, it took real courage. Doesn't feel like courage, he admitted, leaning against the wall. Feels like what I should have done years ago. Better late than never. She reached through the bars, her hand extended. After a moment's hesitation, Zane took it, feeling the warmth of her fingers against his calloused palm. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of uncertainty hanging between them. Finally, Tessa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what happens next, Zane, for either of us. He squeezed her hand gently before letting go. Me neither. But for the first time in my life, I'm not running from the consequences. Whatever comes next, I'll face it. Tessa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And what about us? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities and fears. Zane looked at her through the bars, seeing the same woman who had pulled him from the burning wreckage of his bike, who had believed in him when no one else would. I don't know, he answered honestly. I don't know what kind of future I can offer anyone right now. The walls of the prison visiting room had become familiar to Tessa over the past few months. She sat at the metal table, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of vending machine coffee, watching Zane through the scratched plexiglass barrier. He looked different now, thinner, but somehow stronger. The prison jumpsuit hung loose on his frame, but his eyes held a clarity she'd never seen before. "I started those anger management classes you mentioned," Zane said into the phone receiver, his voice scratchy but determined. "The counselor says I'm making progress." Tessa smiled, though her heart ached at seeing him confined. "That's wonderful, Zane. Are you still attending the addiction recovery meetings too?" He nodded, running a hand through his shorter hair. Gone was the wild mane he'd worn as a biker. "Haven't missed one. Some of the guys there, they've been through similar stuff. It helps to talk about it." "Lucas asks about you," Tessa said softly, watching his reaction. "He's worried." Zane's face softened at the mention of her son. "Tell him I'm doing better. Tell him." He paused, swallowing hard. "Tell him I'm sorry for putting you both through all that mess with the gang." Tessa pressed her hand against the plexiglass. "You're making it right, Zane. That's what matters now." Their visits continued like this, week after week. Tessa watched as Zane worked through the prison's rehabilitation programs, earning credits for good behavior and counseling hours. He took classes, learning trade skills and earning his GED. Each visit showed small changes: better posture, clearer speech, fewer shadows in his eyes. One Tuesday morning, 3 months into his sentence, Zane shared unexpected news. "The DA's office called yesterday," he said, trying to contain his excitement. "My testimony led to 15 more arrests. They're offering to reduce my sentence." Tessa's heart skipped. "Really? How much time?" "If everything goes through, I could be out in 2 weeks." His voice wavered. "But Tessa, I need to know, should I stay away when I get out? From you and Lucas? I don't want to bring any more trouble to your door." Tessa studied his face, the face of a man who'd saved himself through sheer determination and the courage to face his past. She saw nothing of the dangerous biker who'd crashed his motorcycle that night. This was someone new, someone who'd fought his way back from this brink. 2 weeks later, Tessa stood outside the prison gates, her hands trembling slightly as she waited. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as the heavy metal doors groaned open. Zane stepped out, carrying a small box of belongings, wearing clean jeans and a plain white t-shirt the prison had provided. He paused at the threshold, blinking in the bright sunlight. His face showed a mix of disbelief and hope as he took his first steps as a free man. The guard at the gate checked his release papers one final time, then nodded. Zane walked slowly toward the parking lot, each step measured and deliberate. He looked different now, not just physically, but in the way he carried himself. The weight of his past still showed in his eyes, but there was something else there too. Determination, and maybe even peace. When he reached the gate, he stopped, taking a deep breath of free air. The box in his hands contained everything he owned in the world, some books, letters, and documents, but his expression suggested he had gained something far more valuable during his time inside: a chance at redemption. The diner's neon sign cast a soft pink glow across the parking lot as Zane sat in his beat-up truck, gathering his courage. Through the window, he could see his old friend Mike wiping down tables. Not gang member Mike, but Mike from high school, before everything went wrong. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he remembered Tessa's words. Small steps, one day at a time. Finally, he pushed open the truck door and walked inside. The bell above the door chimed, and Mike looked up. "Well, I'll be damned," Mike said, dropping his rag on the table. "Zane McGrath." Zane stood awkwardly by the door, his work boots scuffing the linoleum floor. "Hey, Mike, been a while." Mike studied him for a long moment, then broke into a wide smile. "Too long, brother." He crossed the diner and pulled Zane into a bear hug. "Heard you were out. Been waiting for you to show up." The tension in Zane's shoulders eased slightly. "Wasn't sure I'd be welcome." "You kidding? We grew up together, man. Before all that other stuff." Mike gestured to a booth. "Coffee's fresh. On the house." As they sat talking, catching up on years of lost time, Zane felt something he hadn't in ages: normalcy. Mike told him about his wife, his kids, the diner he'd bought 5 years ago. No judgment, just stories about a life Zane could have had. "Listen," Mike said, leaning forward. "I need help in the kitchen. Nothing fancy, just prep work and dishes to start. Pay's not great, but it's honest work." Zane's throat tightened. "You'd trust me? After everything?" "I trust the guy sitting in front of me now," Mike said firmly. "The one trying to do better." Later that evening, Zane drove to Tessa's house. She was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a cardigan against the evening chill. Lucas sat on the steps, pretending to be absorbed in his phone, but clearly watching Zane's approach. "I got a job," Zane said without preamble. "At Mike's diner." Tessa's face softened. "Mike Thompson? From your high school?" Zane nodded, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Starting tomorrow. It's not much, but—" "It's a start," Tessa finished for him. She smiled, though he could see the caution in her eyes. The trust between them was like a delicate seedling, fragile but growing. Lucas looked up from his phone. "That diner makes the best chocolate shakes in town," he offered, his voice carefully neutral, but not hostile. "Maybe—" Zane hesitated, glancing at Tessa. "Maybe I could bring some by sometime?" "We'd like that," Tessa said softly. "Wouldn't we, Lucas?" Lucas shrugged, but there was the ghost of a smile on his face. "Yeah, I guess." Standing there in the growing dusk, Zane felt the weight of their cautious acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was hope, as fragile as a butterfly's wing, and just as precious. He had a chance to prove himself, to show them that the changes he'd made in prison weren't just words. "One day at a time," he murmured, and Tessa nodded, understanding in her eyes. "One day at a time," she echoed. The late afternoon sun filtered through Tessa's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the pile of bills spread out on her worn wooden table. Her hands trembled as she sorted through them. Mortgage payment, medical bills, Lucas's school expenses. The numbers blurred together, a mounting wave threatening to drown her. A knock at the door made her jump. She quickly tried to gather the papers, but Zane had already stepped inside, his work clothes dusty from his shift at the construction site. "Tessa?" He paused, taking in her red-rimmed eyes and the scattered bills. "What's wrong?" She attempted a smile, but it crumbled. "I'm fine, just—" Her voice caught. All these months of keeping it together, of pretending everything was okay, suddenly felt too heavy to bear. Zane pulled out a chair and sat down beside her. "Talk to me." "I've been struggling," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ever since I had to quit nursing after my injury." She gestured to the papers. "The medical bills keep coming. The diner job barely covers groceries. I'm behind on the mortgage, and Lucas needs new school supplies. And I just—" A sob escaped her throat. "I don't know what to do anymore." Zane's face softened as he looked at the woman who had saved his life, who had believed in him when no one else would. She'd been carrying this burden alone all this time, just as he had carried his own demons. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked gently. Tessa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm supposed to be the strong one, the one who helps others, not—" She gestured helplessly at herself. "That's not how it works," Zane said firmly. "You taught me that, remember? Nobody makes it alone." He reached for the stack of bills, studying them carefully. After a moment, he stood up and walked to his truck. When he returned, he was holding an envelope. "I've been saving," he explained, placing it on the table, "from my construction work. Was gonna buy a new bike, but—" He pushed the envelope toward her. "This is better." Tessa stared at the envelope, then at Zane. "I can't accept." "Yes, you can." His voice was gentle, but firm. "You saved my life, Tessa. Not just that night on the road, but every day since. Let me help you now." With trembling fingers, Tessa opened the envelope. Inside was enough money to cover her most pressing debts. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different from before. "Zane, He shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just let someone else be strong for you, for once. Tessa looked at the man before her, so different from the broken soul she'd pulled from that wreckage months ago. In this moment, she saw not the ex-con or the former gang member, but simply a good man trying to make things right. The late afternoon sun filtered through Tessa's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the pile of bills spread out on her worn wooden table. Her hands trembled as she sorted through them. Mortgage payment, medical bills, Lucas's school expenses. The numbers blurred together, a mounting wave threatening to drown her. A knock at the door made her jump. She quickly tried to gather the papers, but Zane had already stepped inside, his work clothes dusty from his shift at the construction site. His eyes fell on the scattered bills, and his expression softened. "You don't have to hide these from me anymore," he said quietly, pulling out a chair beside her. Tessa's shoulders slumped. "I'm just not used to letting anyone see this part of my life." She gestured at the papers. "It feels like failure." Zane reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "You've been carrying this alone for too long." He picked up one of the medical bills, studying it. "This is from your injury?" She nodded, unconsciously rubbing her hip where the old injury still bothered her. "Insurance only covered so much. Then I couldn't work as a nurse anymore, and everything just—" She waved her hand at the pile. "We'll figure it out together," Zane said firmly. "I'm making good money at the site now, and I want to help." "Zane, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." He squeezed her hand. "You gave me a second chance when nobody else would. Let me do this." From the living room came the sound of Lucas's video game, the familiar beeps and music floating through the house. Zane glanced that way, then back at Tessa. "Besides, we're family now, aren't we? That's what families do. They help each other." Tears pricked at Tessa's eyes. She'd been so strong for so long, trying to handle everything on her own. "Yes," she whispered. "We are family." Together they began sorting through the bills, making a plan. Zane's practical approach helped calm her anxiety, and for the first time in years, Tessa felt the weight on her shoulders beginning to lift. Later that evening, Lucas called from the living room. "Mom, can you help me with this math homework?" Before Tessa could get up, Zane said, "Mind if I take this one?" Math was always my strong suit, believe it or not. She nodded, watching as he made his way to where Lucas sat, surrounded by textbooks. Zane settled onto the couch beside him, and soon they were deep in conversation about equations and formulas. Lucas's initial tension melted away as Zane patiently explained the concepts, occasionally making jokes that had her son actually laughing. Tessa leaned against the doorframe, taking in the scene before her. The sight of them together. Zane pointing at something in the textbook, Lucas nodding with understanding, filled her heart with unexpected joy. This wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself, but somehow, it felt more right than anything she could have planned. She watched as Lucas showed Zane his solution to a problem, and Zane's face lit up with pride. "That's exactly right, kid. You've got this." The smile on Lucas's face, the protective way Zane had positioned himself beside him, the easy comfort between them, it all spoke of something she'd thought might never be possible. They weren't just three broken people anymore. They were healing, together, becoming something new and stronger. A deep sense of peace settled over her as she watched her unlikely family, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The doorbell rang, just as Tessa was pulling a batch of cookies from the oven. Through the kitchen window, she saw a sleek, black motorcycle parked in her driveway, its chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. Her heart skipped a beat. Zane emerged from the garage where he'd been helping Lucas with a science project. His expression darkened when he saw the visitor through the window, Snake, his former right-hand man from the gang, leaning against the porch railing with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Stay inside," Zane told Tessa and Lucas firmly. He squared his shoulders and stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "Been a while, brother," Snake said, pushing off the railing. His leather vest was adorned with familiar patches that made Zane's stomach turn. We miss you out there on the road." "I'm not your brother anymore," Zane replied, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. "That life is behind me." Snake's smile faded. "Come on, man. You really gonna throw away everything we built? For what? Playing house with some crippled waitress and her kid?" He gestured dismissively at the modest home. "This ain't you, Zane. You're better than this suburban nightmare." Through the window, Zane could see Tessa holding Lucas back, both of them watching with worried expressions. He thought about all the nights they'd stayed up talking, all the times Lucas had sought his advice about school bullies, all the quiet moments when Tessa's strength had shown him a different kind of power than what he'd known in the gang. "You're wrong," Zane said, taking a step forward. "This is exactly who I am now, who I was meant to be." "Don't be stupid," Snake growled, his friendly facade cracking. "The boss is willing to forget about your little stunt with the cops. Come back now, all is forgiven. But this is your last chance." Zane felt the weight of his past pressing down on him. For a moment he could smell the gasoline and leather, hear the roar of engines, and taste the metallic tang of adrenaline. But then he remembered the peace he'd found here, the way Tessa looked at him with trust instead of fear, how Lucas had slowly started calling him Dad when he thought no one was listening. "No," Zane said firmly, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who finally knew his path. "I'm done, Snake, for good this time. Tell the boss to forget about me." Snake's face twisted with anger. "You ungrateful piece of—" "Leave," Zane cut him off, drawing himself up to his full height. "And don't come back. Ever. My family's off limits." They stared each other down for a long moment, years of shared history crackling between them like electricity. Finally, Snake spat on the porch and turned away. "You're dead to us," he snarled, stalking toward his bike. "I've been dead to you since the day Tessa saved my life," Zane replied calmly. "I just didn't know it yet." He watched as Snake roared away in a cloud of dust and exhaust. When the rumble of the motorcycle faded, the front door opened behind him. Tessa's hand slipped into his, while Lucas pressed against his other side. They stood there together, a family forged in fire and redemption, watching the last traces of Zane's old life disappear down the road. "You okay?" Tessa asked softly. Zane squeezed her hand, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Yeah," he said. "For the first time in my life, I really am." The evening sun painted Tessa's small backyard in warm, golden hues. She sat on the wooden deck steps, watching Lucas and Zane toss a football back and forth. Her son's laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the chirping of birds in the old maple tree. Zane caught the ball and tucked it under his arm, making his way over to where Tessa sat. His tattoos, once symbols of his dark past, now seemed softer in the fading light. He lowered himself beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. "You know," he said, his voice gentle, "I never thought I'd have anything like this." He gestured to the peaceful scene around them, the well-tended garden Tessa had planted in spring, the wind chimes Lucas had made in art class, the fresh coat of paint on the fence they'd all worked on together last weekend. Tessa leaned into him slightly. "Neither did I, after everything that happened." She absently rubbed her leg, a habit she'd developed since her injury. "But here we are." Lucas jogged over, slightly out of breath. "Mom, can we have pizza tonight, since it's Friday?" "Sure, sweetheart," Tessa smiled. "Why don't you go inside and grab the menu?" As Lucas bounded into the house, Zane turned to face Tessa. His eyes, once haunted by shadows, now held a steady warmth. "I've been thinking," he said, reaching for her hand, "about our future." "Oh?" Tessa's heart quickened. "I know it hasn't been easy. The town gossip, the sideways looks." He squeezed her hand. "But you never gave up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. That's because I saw who you really are, Zane, not who you were trying to be." He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "I want to build something real with you and Lucas. something permanent. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. I found a place. It's a little bigger than this house, with a proper garage where I could start that motorcycle repair business we talked about. Tessa's eyes widened as she looked at the listing. The house was beautiful. Nothing fancy, but solid and welcoming, with a wraparound porch she'd always dreamed of having. We could make it ours, Zane continued. All three of us. A fresh start. Zane, tears welled in Tessa's eyes. Are you sure? It's such a big step. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I've never been more sure of anything. You and Lucas, you're my family now, my real family. Lucas burst back onto the deck, menu in hand, but stopped short when he saw his mother's tears. Mom? Are you okay? Tessa laughed, wiping her eyes. I'm more than okay, sweetie. Come here. She patted the step beside her. As Lucas settled next to them, Zane shared his plans for their future. The boy's eyes lit up at the mention of the bigger backyard and the possibility of finally getting a dog. They sat together, the three of them, talking about paint colors and furniture arrangements, their voices filled with excitement and hope. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. But for once, the approaching darkness held no fear, no uncertainty. Instead, it promised a new dawn, a fresh beginning for this unlikely family brought together by fate and bound by love. Tessa reached for Zane's hand, and he intertwined his fingers with hers. Lucas leaned against his mother's shoulder, still chattering about his dreams for their new home. They sat there together, watching the sky turn from gold to pink, their hearts full of dreams for tomorrow. The evening sun painted Tessa's small backyard in warm, golden hues. She sat on the wooden deck steps, watching Lucas and Zane toss a football back and forth. Her son's laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the chirping of birds in the old maple tree. Zane caught the ball and tucked it under his arm, making his way over to where Tessa sat. His tattoos, once symbols of his dark past, now seemed softer in the fading light. He lowered himself beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. You know, he said, his voice gentle, I never thought I'd have anything like this. He gestured to the peaceful scene around them, the well-tended garden Tessa had planted in spring, the wind chimes Lucas had made in art class, the fresh coat of paint on the fence they'd all worked on together last weekend. Tessa leaned into him slightly. Neither did I, after everything that happened. She absently rubbed her leg, a habit she'd developed since her injury. But sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Lucas jogged over, his cheeks flushed from the exercise. Mom, can we have pizza tonight? He plopped down on the step below them, looking up with hopeful eyes. Zane said he'd teach me how to make it from scratch. Did he now? Tessa raised an eyebrow at Zane, who shrugged with a grin. Figured it was time to pass on my secret recipe, Zane said, ruffling Lucas's hair. Your mom's been putting up with my cooking experiments for months now. And we've only had to order takeout twice, Lucas teased, ducking away from Zane's hand. The three of them laughed, and Tessa felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. She remembered the first time Lucas had met Zane in the hospital, how her son had stood defensively between them, suspicious and protective. Now, watching them together, she could hardly believe how far they'd come. Zane stood up, offering his hand to Tessa. Come on, both of you. If we're going to make pizza, we better get started. In the kitchen, they fell into an easy rhythm. Lucas measured ingredients while Zane showed him how to knead the dough properly. Tessa chopped vegetables, stealing glances at her boys working together. The kitchen filled with the smell of fresh herbs and the sound of their comfortable chatter. Hey, Mom, Lucas called out, holding up flour-covered hands. Remember when you tried to make bread last Christmas? And set off the smoke alarm, Zane added with a chuckle. The whole house smelled like burnt toast for days. Tessa threw a dish towel at him playfully. I seem to remember someone promising never to bring that up again. Some promises are made to be broken, Zane said, catching the towel and wiping his hands. His eyes met Tessa's, and they shared a knowing look. There were other promises, more important ones, that would never be broken. As they worked together in the warm kitchen, Tessa felt overwhelmed by how natural it all felt. The three of them had created something precious here, something that went beyond the traditional bounds of family. They'd built it piece by piece, through hard times and good ones, through trust earned and faith kept. The sun was setting outside the kitchen window, casting long shadows across their small town. Tessa paused in her work to look at Zane, teaching Lucas how to toss the pizza dough in the air, both of them laughing as it nearly hit the ceiling. A smile spread across her face as she watched them, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, as a family. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.